I suppose I should start by telling you that I never imagined my life would come to this. I'm not the sort of person who ever had trouble with the law. For 68 years, I kept my head down, paid my bills on time, and tried to be the kind of woman my mother would have been proud of. My name is Eleanor. Most folks around here just call me Ellie. I've lived in the same small Midwestern town nearly my whole life, the kind of place where everyone knows whose boy got married, who got caught cheating, and whose dog you have to watch out for. It's quiet here. Quiet enough that you start to believe nothing truly terrible can happen if you just stay decent and mind your own. My daughter Carla passed when Nathan was only 10. She'd struggled with addiction for years, prescription painkillers after a back injury, then heroin when the pills ran dry. When the call came, it was 3 in the morning. I remember sitting in the kitchen with the receiver pressed to my ear, feeling my heart squeeze until I thought it might stop too. After that, Nathan moved in with me. I tried to do right by him. He was a wiry little thing back then, with these green eyes that always looked too sad for a boy his age. I'd pack his lunch, sew the holes in his jeans, and tell him every night that he was loved, no matter what. But love doesn't always save people. I've learned that the hard way. By the time Nathan turned 25, he'd already been through more jobs than I could count. He'd pick up shifts at the gas station or the diner, only to quit or get fired a few weeks later. There was always a story. Someone had it out for him, or he'd been misunderstood, or life was just unfair. And maybe it was. Maybe the world had never given him a real chance. I tried to remind myself of that every time he showed up at my door, duffel bag slung over his shoulder, asking if he could stay just for a little while. That's how it was this last time. He came to me in early spring. I remember because the crocuses had just started blooming along my front walk. He stood there on the porch, shivering in a thin jacket, and said he'd finally had enough of drifting. Said he was ready to get his life in order. "I've got an interview lined up tomorrow, Grandma," he told me, voice low and hopeful. "I just need a place to sleep while I get on my feet." I wanted so badly to believe him. I made up the guest room again, same as always. Fresh sheets, extra blanket folded at the end of the bed. I even set a small vase of daffodils on the dresser because I thought it might feel welcoming. A week passed. He went out most days, came back late. He'd tell me he'd been putting in applications, meeting with managers, checking listings on library computers. I didn't question it, though something in my gut felt uneasy. Then, one evening, he sat across from me at the kitchen table, fidgeting with his hands. He cleared his throat the way he used to when he was a boy, about to ask for something he knew I might say no to. "Grandma," he said, "I know you probably won't be comfortable with this, but I need to ask if I could use your car, just for a little bit. There's a place hiring over in Riverton and the bus schedule doesn't match up with the interview time." I looked out the window at my old sedan parked in the drive. That car had been my lifeline ever since I retired from the post office. I used it to get groceries, go to the doctor, drive to the cemetery on Sundays to visit Carla's grave. It wasn't fancy, 10 years old and a little rusty around the wheel wells, but it was mine. I hesitated. My first instinct was to say no, to tell him he'd have to find another way. But then I looked at him, at that boyish tilt of his chin, the way his shoulders slumped, and all I could see was that little boy who'd once clung to my skirt after his mother's funeral. "Just for the interview?" I asked. He nodded, swore it would only be a day, 2 at most. So I handed him the keys, and I told myself I was doing the right thing. The first day, he came home around dusk, all smiles and chatter about how the interview had gone well. He said they'd call him by the end of the week. He even brought back a bag of takeout, fried chicken and biscuits, my favorite. "Just a little thank you," he told me, kissing the top of my head. I remember thinking maybe this time was different. Maybe he meant it when he said he was trying. I let myself enjoy the small kindness of a warm meal someone else had paid for. But by the second week, things started feeling off. He began leaving earlier, before the sun came up, and coming home late, sometimes after midnight. He said he was doing odd jobs for cash while he waited to hear about the official offer. I wanted to believe him, so I nodded and tried not to pry. But the excuses piled up like damp laundry. One afternoon, I was folding towels in the living room when I heard a car pull up outside. I peeked through the curtains, expecting to see Nathan. But it wasn't him. It was a dark SUV with tinted windows. Two young men got out, looking around like they were casing the place. One of them knocked on the door, but before I could open it, they turned and walked back to the car. When Nathan came home that evening, I told him about it. He rubbed a hand over his face and said they were just friends who probably got the wrong address. "Nothing to worry about, Grandma," he insisted. "People make mistakes." But his eyes didn't quite meet mine. That weekend, I had to use the car myself. My neighbor, Donna, needed a ride to the pharmacy. When I opened the glove box to find the insurance card, I noticed a small plastic bag tucked behind some old receipts. I pulled it out without thinking. It was full of pills. I stared at it so long my vision blurred. My heart started beating so hard I thought I might faint right there in the passenger seat. Donna must have seen the look on my face, because she asked if I was all right. I shoved the bag back in, told her I was fine, and drove her in silence. That night, Nathan came home smelling like smoke. His hair was damp and his eyes looked glassy. I wanted to confront him. The words gathered in my throat, pressing against my tongue. But when he hugged me goodnight, they died there. Because I was tired. Tired of fighting, tired of accusing. Tired of feeling like I'd failed him somehow. A couple of days later, my neighbor across the street, Mr. Jenkins, stopped me by the mailbox. He's old, nearly 90, and doesn't mince words. "Ellie," he said, "I don't like to meddle, but I saw your car over on Jackson last night. That's a rough part of town. You okay?" I lied without thinking, told him it must have been a mistake. Maybe someone else had a similar car. But in my gut, I knew. I started staying up, waiting for Nathan to get home. I'd watch the clock tick past midnight, past 1 in the morning. Sometimes he wouldn't come home at all. When he did, he'd be jumpy, eyes darting to the window like he expected someone to follow him. The tension settled over the house like dust. I tried to remind myself that he was my grandson, that he needed someone to believe in him, that maybe this was just another rough patch he'd grow out of. But the truth was, my hope was starting to feel more like denial. One evening he came home with a new phone, a wad of cash he said he'd earned doing deliveries, and a hollow look that made my stomach ache. I went to bed that night with the awful, gnawing certainty that something was about to break. It was just past 3 in the morning when the banging started. At first, I thought I was dreaming. I'd fallen asleep in my armchair again, the TV still murmuring in the corner. The banging came again, loud, insistent. A man's voice shouting, "Police! Open the door!" My heart stuttered. I sat there, frozen, hand pressed over my chest, trying to make sense of it. When I finally got to my feet and opened the door, the porch was flooded with white light. Flashlights cut through the darkness, beams landing on my face, the walls, the little rug that said "Welcome." 3 uniformed officers stood there. One of them, a tall man with a tired expression, stepped forward and held up a badge. "Ma'am, is this your residence?" I nodded, throat too tight to answer. "Is Nathan Reeves here?" I swallowed. "He's my grandson. He should be here. What's this about?" The officer shifted his weight, like he hated what he had to say next. "We have reason to believe your vehicle was involved in narcotics trafficking tonight. We need to conduct a search." My knees nearly gave out. I leaned on the doorframe, shaking my head. No, there must be some mistake. I haven't left the house. "Is the vehicle here?" I turned and looked out past the porch steps. The old sedan was parked in the driveway, the front bumper half hidden by the hydrangeas. Yes, I whispered. Two officers walked past me into the house without waiting for permission. The tall one stayed with me, asking if there were any weapons inside, if anyone else was home. I told him no weapons, just me. But as I said it, I realized I hadn't seen Nathan since dinner the night before. The other officers came back to the door, one holding up a clear evidence bag. Even from where I stood, I could see the small baggies inside. White powder, little pills, things I didn't recognize but knew were bad. Found these in the glove compartment, the officer said quietly. I started to shake. I didn't know. Those aren't mine. The taller officer looked at me, his face unreadable. Mum, I'm going to need you to step outside. I didn't understand. I thought they'd just take the car, maybe ask me some questions. But the next thing I knew, he was reciting words that barely registered. Something about probable cause, something about rights. And then he was reaching for my wrists. I gasped when the handcuffs snapped closed. The metal was cold against my skin. Somewhere in the back of my mind, a small, absurd thought flitted through. What will the neighbors think? They led me down the porch steps, the gravel cold beneath my slippers. I heard a door open behind me. Mr. Jenkins, standing on his stoop in his robe, staring. I couldn't look at him. They put me in the back of the cruiser. The seat was hard plastic, nothing like the worn upholstery in my own car. I remember thinking that my legs didn't seem to work right. The drive to the station felt endless. I kept trying to explain, to the officer driving, to myself, that there had to be some mistake, that I was a grandmother, not a criminal. But the words sounded thin, even to my own ears. When we pulled up to the station, they helped me out, guided me through metal detectors and into a small room with a table bolted to the floor. I'd never been inside a police station before. I'd never even had a speeding ticket. Now I was sitting there with my hands cuffed in front of me, the overhead light buzzing like an angry wasp. After a while, a younger officer came in. He read me my rights again, then started asking questions. Where I'd been that night, who had access to my car, when I'd last seen Nathan. I told him everything I could. My voice cracked when I said I didn't know where Nathan was. The officer nodded, expression neutral, like he'd heard the same story 100 times before. I thought of Nathan's face when he was small, the way he'd looked at me like I was the only safe place he had left. And for the first time since the banging started, I began to cry. I don't know how long I sat there in that little room. The clock on the wall ticked steadily, but time felt warped, like I was watching my life from the wrong side of a glass wall. Every so often the door would open and close. A different officer would come in and ask me the same questions in slightly different ways. When did you last see your grandson? Has he ever asked you to hold something for him? Do you know anyone he associates with? I kept telling them the truth. I didn't know anything. I was just a grandmother who let her grandson borrow her car. I didn't know about the pills or the deliveries or whatever else he'd been doing. But the looks they gave me were wary, skeptical, like they'd heard this same defense 1,000 times from people who were lying. When the younger officer, Detective Murray, he'd said his name was, asked me again if I had any idea where Nathan might be, I hesitated, not because I was protecting him, but because I genuinely didn't know. He said he had deliveries, I murmured. I thought he meant groceries or takeout. I never asked. Detective Murray nodded, scribbled something in his notebook, and then left the room. I rested my forehead on my cuffed hands and closed my eyes. My whole body felt heavy, like it might slide right out of the chair. That was when the phone on the table buzzed. A different officer came in holding it. "It's for you?" I stared at him. "For me?" "Your grandson." He set the phone down and stepped back. For a moment, I thought I wouldn't pick it up. That maybe if I didn't hear his voice, it wouldn't feel so real. But my hand moved almost on its own. I lifted the receiver to my ear. "Grandma." Nathan's voice came through, thin and ragged, like he'd been crying. "Oh God. Grandma, I'm so sorry. Where are you?" My voice sounded hoarse. I can't tell you that," he stammered. "They're looking for me. I, I didn't mean for you to get caught up in this." I squeezed my eyes shut, pressing my palm over my heart, as if that could keep it from breaking any further. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" I whispered. "Please," he pleaded. "Don't tell them where I am. I'll turn myself in, I swear, but not yet. I need time to figure things out." I thought of the evidence bag with those little white pills, the officers searching my house, Mr. Jenkins watching me get led away in handcuffs, and I knew in that moment that Nathan hadn't thought about me at all. Not when he put that poison in my car. Not when he left me sitting in my living room, waiting for police to knock down my door. He was only thinking about himself. My hand trembled so badly I had to grip the receiver with both hands. "I can't help you," I said finally. My voice sounded hollow. "I've done enough. Grandma." I set the phone back in the cradle, cutting him off. For a long time I just sat there staring at the wall. When Detective Murray came back in, he asked if I'd learned anything useful. I shook my head. He studied me for a moment, then said, almost gently, "You understand this is serious. Those weren't small amounts. Your vehicle has been linked to multiple deliveries." "I understand," I whispered. They left me alone again. The door clicked shut behind him. And all I could think was that somewhere along the line, I'd convinced myself love was enough to keep Nathan safe. That if I just kept giving him chances, eventually he'd stop hurting himself and the people who loved him. But the truth was so much colder. Love hadn't saved my daughter, and it hadn't saved Nathan either. That night, sitting in that grey-walled room, I realized it might be too late to save anything at all. They released me the next morning on my own recognizance. The officer who unfastened the cuffs tried to be gentle, but the skin around my wrists was already bruised, thin as tissue paper. I remember the walk through the station's front lobby. It was still early, just after sunrise, but the air felt heavy, oppressive. I couldn't bring myself to look at anyone. Outside, the wind blew cold against my cheeks. I had no car to drive home. They'd impounded it as evidence, so I did the only thing I could. I called Donna, my neighbor. When she pulled up to the curb, she didn't say a word at first, just reached across the seat and took my hand. I thought I might start crying again, but the tears wouldn't come. All I could feel was numb. She drove me back to my house. The siding looked dingy in the early light, the yard unkempt after weeks of my attention being elsewhere. My life used to feel so solid, like something built brick by brick over decades. Now it felt like a hollow shell. I thanked Donna and stepped inside alone. It didn't take long for the news to spread. By that afternoon, I'd gotten 2 calls from cousins I hadn't spoken to in years. Both of them started with the same hollow sympathy. "We're so sorry to hear about this, Ellie. Before moving on to the real question, did you know?" Did I know Nathan was dealing drugs? Did I know he was using my car for God knows what? Every time I tried to answer, my voice would catch in my throat. I didn't know. Not really. But I'd ignored every sign, every gut feeling. In some ways, that felt just as damning. At the grocery store the next morning, the cashier, a woman I'd known since she was a teenager, wouldn't quite look me in the eye. She scanned my bread and milk in silence, her mouth pressed into a thin line. The woman behind me in line was whispering to someone on the phone. I heard her say my name. I wanted to leave everything in the cart and run out the door. Instead, I stood there and paid for my groceries like nothing was wrong, because that's what you do when the world starts crumbling around you. You keep moving, one small motion at a time. When I got home, there was an envelope stuck in my screen door. No return address, just my name in block letters. I opened it on the kitchen counter, hands trembling. Inside was a folded piece of notebook paper. Ellie, it read, "You've always been kind to everyone. I'm sorry this happened to you. Don't let people tell you it's your fault." No signature. I sat down at the table and read it again and again until the words blurred. That afternoon, a social worker called. She said she'd been assigned to my case because of the severity of the charges. Even though the detective had told me I wasn't under arrest anymore, they still needed to investigate further before formally clearing me. She asked if I had anywhere else to stay if they decided to execute another search warrant. I thought about it for a moment, about packing a bag, driving away from the only home I'd ever known. But the car was gone, and even if it hadn't been, I didn't have anywhere to go. "No," I told her quietly. "I'll be here." After we hung up, I just sat there in the silence. In the days that followed, the house filled with memories I couldn't stop replaying. Nathan as a baby, gumming his first toy. Nathan at 15, hugging me after his mother's funeral. Nathan at 25, standing in my kitchen with that hollow look in his eyes. How did it all go so wrong? Sometimes I thought about calling him. I still had the number from the station. But every time I picked up the phone, something in me recoiled. He had made his choices, and I had to start figuring out how to live with mine. A week after I came home, I got a call from the public defender assigned to me. His name was Mr. Carver. He sounded young, maybe not much older than Nathan, but his voice had that calm, practiced cadence that made me feel, for just a moment, like maybe everything could be set right. He explained that while I wasn't formally charged yet, the county prosecutor was still deciding whether to indict me. "They have your vehicle registered at several known drug locations," he said carefully. "They have you as the owner. You were in possession when the drugs were found." "But I didn't know," I whispered. "I swear to you. I didn't know." "I believe you," he said. And for a moment, I almost cried again. But we need to be prepared for the possibility that they won't. The best way to clear your name is to cooperate fully and testify if it comes to trial. I knew what he was saying. I'd have to stand up in front of strangers, and in front of Nathan, and say it all out loud. What he'd done, how he'd used me. I pressed my hand to my chest. My heart felt too big for my ribs. Will he go to prison?" Mr. Carver was silent for a moment. "Most likely. The quantity found, combined with prior arrests. He's looking at significant time." I closed my eyes. The kitchen around me felt too bright, too still. After we hung up, I sat in that same chair for hours. I thought about every time I'd told Nathan I'd always be there for him. Every time I'd bailed him out of trouble, cleaned up his messes, believed his promises. I thought about the day I first took him in, when he was 10 years old, and so small his feet didn't even touch the floor when he sat at this same kitchen table. He'd looked up at me with wide, scared eyes and said, "You won't leave me, right?" "Never," I'd promised him. But sitting there with a legal pad of notes and the weight of everything he'd done pressing on my chest, I finally understood something I should have learned a long time ago. Loving someone doesn't mean protecting them from consequences. Sometimes it means standing back and letting the truth come to light, even if it breaks your heart in the process. That night, I made myself a cup of tea I never drank. I stood by the window, looking out at the empty driveway where my car used to be. I didn't sleep much. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Nathan as a little boy, waving from the back seat as I drove him to school. But the memories had sharp edges now, cutting into whatever part of me still wanted to pretend he was blameless. When the sun came up, I called Mr. Carver back and told him I would testify. The relief in his voice was immediate. He said it was the right thing to do. Maybe it was. But as I set the phone down, all I felt was hollow. Later that morning, Detective Murray stopped by to confirm the details. He was polite, almost apologetic, but I still couldn't look him in the eye for more than a few seconds at a time. He told me Nathan had been picked up 2 counties over, sleeping in the back of a friend's car. He asked if you were okay, the detective said, not unkindly. I didn't know how to answer that, because the truth was, I wasn't. But I was alive, I was here, and I was starting to understand that sometimes that had to be enough. After he left, I sat in the quiet and tried to imagine what it would feel like to take the witness stand, to look my grandson in the eye and tell the court exactly what he'd done. I thought it might break me, but I also knew there wasn't any other way. The courthouse was older than I expected. High ceilings, pale wood paneling, the faint smell of floor polish and paper. I sat in the hallway outside the courtroom, clutching my purse in my lap. My hands were shaking so badly I pressed them against the fabric to make them stop. Mr. Carver arrived and sat beside me. He explained what would happen, how they'd call me up, how I'd be asked to describe what I knew. It's important you speak clearly and truthfully, he said gently. That's all you have to do. I nodded, even though my mouth felt too dry to answer. When they called my name, my legs felt like they didn't belong to me. I walked past rows of strangers, some reporters, some other families who'd come to see their own tragedies play out, and stepped up to the stand. And there he was, Nathan. He looked smaller somehow, sitting there in the defendant's chair. His hair was longer and he hadn't shaved. When he saw me, something flickered across his face, something like shame, or maybe fear. I don't know if he expected me to look away, but I didn't. The prosecutor asked me to state my name, my relationship to the defendant. Then he began his questions. Had I lent Nathan my car? Did I know he was using it to transport narcotics? Had I ever given him permission to hide drugs in my home or vehicle? My voice was steady, though my hands still trembled. No, I told them. I did not know. Nathan didn't look up. The defense attorney tried to rattle me. She asked whether I had any reason to suspect Nathan was involved in illegal activity, whether I'd seen anything suspicious, and ignored it. I wanted to be angry at her, but the truth was, her questions were fair. Yes, I admitted. I did see things that made me uneasy. I didn't ask enough questions. I didn't want to believe he could do something like this. Silence settled over the courtroom, heavy and final. After my testimony, I stepped down, feeling as if my legs might buckle. I sat in the gallery and listened as the evidence was presented. Photos of my car in alleys I'd never driven through, baggies labelled and numbered, phone records tying Nathan to other known dealers. Some part of me still wanted to stand up and beg them to show mercy, to remember that he was a person, not just a case number. But I stayed silent. When the jury returned, I didn't watch Nathan's face. Guilty. Possession with intent to distribute. The judge read the sentence, years longer than I could even process. My ears rang so loud, I barely heard the gavel fall. When it was over, Nathan looked back at me. His eyes were wet. For a moment I saw that little boy again, the one who used to fall asleep with his head in my lap. But I didn't stand. I didn't wave. I only held his gaze for as long as I could bear it, then turned and walked out of the courtroom alone. After the trial, the house felt emptier than it ever had. I sold the car. I couldn't stand to see that driveway with nothing but rust and memory. Some neighbours slowly began to treat me the way they used to, waving when I fetched my mail, stopping to chat about the weather. Others kept their distance, as if what happened to me might be contagious. I didn't blame them. At night, I lay in bed and replayed everything I could have done differently. Maybe if I'd been stricter. Maybe if I'd asked more questions. Maybe if I'd loved him a little less blindly. But regret is a hollow thing. It can't change a single hour of what has already been lived. A month after the sentencing, I got a letter from Nathan. His handwriting was uneven, like he'd been shaking when he wrote it. "Grandma, I'm sorry. I know it doesn't help, but I really am. I didn't mean for any of this. I thought I could handle it. I thought I'd make enough money to pay you back for everything. But I was wrong. I'm sorry I made you choose." I folded the letter and set it in a drawer I don't open often. He didn't ask me to visit. I didn't offer. In the months since, I've tried to rebuild a life that doesn't revolve around waiting for the next crisis. I started volunteering at the church food pantry on Wednesdays. I walk in the mornings before the sun gets too hot. I call Donna sometimes just to hear a voice that isn't my own, echoing in the quiet. Some evenings, I sit on the porch with a cup of tea and watch the cars pass. I still think of Nathan every day. Some people might say I should hate him for what he did, for the humiliation, the fear, the way he shattered what little peace I had left. But the truth is, I don't. I love him still. Loving him doesn't mean I'll ever trust him again. It doesn't mean I'll ever forget the sound of handcuffs closing around my wrists. It just means that even now, even after everything, I remember the boy he was, and I hope, wherever he is, he remembers me as more than the last person who couldn't save him. Because loving someone doesn't mean you erase what they've done. It only means you carry it with you, like a scar that never quite fades. And somehow, you learn to keep living anyway.